Dr. Purnima Singh, Professor Purnima Singh. Very happy to have you here. So welcome. And for our audience, I'd like to share Professor Singh teaches and is a senior professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi, and has been associated with the IACCP for very long years. And we will have her talk about her journey as a psychologist in India and of course her association with the IACCP. So over to you, ma'am.
So thank you, Rachna, and thank you, IACCP, for giving me this opportunity to talk about my journey, as well as talk about the presence of IACCP in India also. I think that would probably help us to even plan out what steps need to be taken in some of the South Asian countries, especially the global South, in order to increase the membership of the association. And it's not just a question of membership, as I see. It's also a question of having an impact in terms of capacity building for people in this region, which in all these years I've realized is utmost needed. And I've realized it much more after, being the editor-in-chief of psychological studies. That's something that we need to kind of, and as an association, I think we need to invest in that. Um, you know, there's good training centers here in India, no doubt about it. But when it comes to publications, when it comes to the various kinds of methodologies and statistics that you see in some of the top international journals, I think that's the capacity building that probably is needed right now in the country. Now, to begin with, I might start by saying that my journey began as a cross-cultural psychologist. My first paper is a comparison of justice perceptions in India and US. And well, the second, and these are my published papers I'm talking about. The second was again on justice perceptions, which was published in Cross-Cultural Psychology in 1985. The JPSP paper was in 1984. I began teaching psychology at Allahabad University, which has been the helm of cross-cultural psychology in the country. Yeah, and even before the teaching part began formally, in 1984, I had this cross-cultural comparison of justice perceptions, as I said, in JPSP, and then a publication in Cross-Cultural Psychology Journal, again on justice perceptions. And this was kind of, sometimes a lot of things in life are, they just happen. So when I started doing my PhD, and that too I did with another famous cross-cultural psychologist, Professor Janak Pandey, who had also been the president of the Cross-Cultural Psychology Association long back, probably in the 90s somehow, I don't remember the exact date. So I began my PhD work with him. And like a young PhD student who has just done the master's, I was looking for something that would interest me as a researcher.
Yes.
And not just interest me, but also sustain me as a researcher.
Right, right.
I think that's very, very important, because one of the problems that I see with a lot of Indian psychology research work is that we, jump on the bandwagon.
Hmm. That's right.
You find something interesting, you get into it, and then you find after some years something else, and then you jump onto it.
Hmm.
In my case, I think it was kind of destined to have this association with cross-cultural psychology, because not because of just my PhD supervisor, but also Professor Durganand Sinha,
Yeah,
who has had a major role in cross-cultural psychology
very
association
true,
also.
very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And Professor Sinha, by the time I started my career as a PhD student, he taught me in masters,
Hmm.
sorry, in bachelor's, and a lot of cross-cultural work done by Jahoda, Whitkin, um, we were exposed to in his class. He taught us a chapter on perception for the entire semester,
Wow.
and a lot of cross-cultural psychology. So that started, being very fascinating for me. With that, when I decided to do my PhD, and as I said, I was looking for something that would interest me. I kind of at that time was, and even today I'm interested in issues of justice.
Right.
And again, this is all destiny to be true. So while I was kind of doing my coursework, etc., and Allahabad University even at that time had coursework in,
Yeah.
psychology for your PhD. So while I was doing my coursework, we had this Fulbright scholar, John J. Berman,
Hmm.
and his wife Virginia Berman, who had come, and we were kind of discussing one day, and I said I have this interest in justice and how people kind of define justice,
Right.
because justice is defined by people in different ways. I mean, even today,
Yes, yes,
I
very
think
true.
that's one of the most elusive concepts that I have been able to see.
Right,
Huh?
right.
You have to have a lens through which you see it, and that defines what is just or what is not. Uh, you know, I remember there was this little quote from Burchide, who had been doing a lot of work on justice, and she mentioned that justice is in the eye of the beholder. And even today, I find that this was a very, very profound statement, because, you know, each one of us, the beholder, they define what is fair or not. So, that universal kind of a principle of justice is something very evasive. Okay. So when John and Virginia had come as a Fulbright scholar, and I had just joined the PhD program doing, my coursework, I was also trying to develop this whole research, my own research in the area of justice and equity, etc., because that kind of I zeroed down to it, because that kind of fascinated me, looking probably at all the injustices around and whatever. I really don't know, but that's something which really fascinated me at that time. So John, Virginia, and me, we were discussing and talking about it, and then we came across an idea. Why don't we do a cross-cultural comparison of justice perceptions in India and US? So we conducted the study to see if there were any differences, and we had long debates. I said, in a country like India, um, there are certain situations where merit may not work, and our whole idea, the constitution, if you say, has been kind of looking at one of the principles, and a major one even today, is that protecting the needy. So if you look at the reservation, etc., there is an emphasis on need in our context. So that's how the first study got developed. So we looked at three principles: need, justice, and merit, and we did a cross-cultural comparison to see which principle is applied more in our context, in Indian context, and in the US context. And surprisingly, when we looked at the results, we found that in US, merit was given much more importance. But in India, need was also given a lot of importance. So you had, a big difference in preferences for justice principles across India and US. And so in the other, which was published in cross-cultural psychology, we were looking at how the, certain other variables, how does the long term and the short term
Right.
impact of that allocation influence.
Wow, that's really
So as
fascinating.
I said, once you are destined sometimes to do a kind of work, and you get all the things, resources,
Yeah, it kind of
which are,
falls in place, is what you're saying. And
yeah, yeah, that, that's exactly what happened to me.
right.
So Professor Sinha being there, with Professor Sinha and Professor, Pandey,
Technology.
I have been attending a lot of IACCP and ICP and IAAP conferences since 91.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a long time.
That's a long time, and I think there's a history to it. I had come for my Commonwealth,
Yeah,
post
fellowship.
fellowship, and I was in Bristol at that time. And Professor Pandey, who's been my mentor, and I think he has helped me to shape my career the way it is today. He said, "Why don't you come over to, I think at that time it was in Brussels. Yeah. So he said, why don't you come over to Brussels? Because we all would be there. And I think it was IAP or ICP, that I'm confused, but cross cultural was certainly there.
Okay.
So I came from, Bristol to this place.
Brussels.
And for the first time, attended the conference. Both the
I
IACCP and these two conferences. First time I was introduced to a lot people there. I think first time I saw Colleen Ward in
okay.
1901. I still remember her face. And John Adair, he was a frequent visitor to our department. He's pretty senior, but now not there. I mean, he's still alive, please, but not so active in IACP.
I see.
John Berry, I have been seeing from
Yeah, for a very
ever
long.
since my student days, and Puttinga.
Right.
And, Allahabad actually within, if you look at India, it became kind of a hub
Huh.
for a number of these cross-cultural psychologists coming over. So Puttinga would come regularly to the department there, and we had, heard him so many times. Berry has been visiting, and not just Allahabad. Even when I moved to IIT Delhi, he visited us. We have R.C. Mishra, who has been doing a lot of cross-cultural psychology with Professor Durganand Sinha, so he is there. So,
Right.
that it's kind of, it was there, and it got, kind of through, singed in me, I would say.
Right. That's
And that
wonderful.
way,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the foundation for, the way I went about in maybe my interests.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so ended up being a social psychologist, more an applied social psychologist.
Right.
Uh, got fascinated by one idea that the universals, the North American psychology or Euro American psychology, is a kind of a weird, you know. Stevens
That's
has come
that's true.
later, all that to write about the weirdos. But I remember hearing Chidam Katsibasi in one of the conferences earlier, where she used this word for the first time in front of me. John Williams, another cross-cultural psychologist, I worked with him, on a couple of projects. Okay, so as you can see,
Yeah, you
you
have
know,
a wonderful set of mentors and collaborators,
yeah, wonderful
evidently.
set of mentors, collaborators. Um, then, as my journey goes on, I got interested, as I said, in justice issues.
Right.
My PhD was also around that topic.
Right.
I was looking at how injustice perceptions, are kind of reacted by people.
Right.
Um, Now that justice thing got some, in between, as I said, we jump onto the bandwagon in India. So I got interested in other things. But, that's kind of my first love. So even now, whenever I have and it's also what you see around, not just in India, all over the world.
Oh,
So
yes, yes.
it's human rights issues, justice,
Yeah,
they
it's kind of
fascinate
pervasive.
me.
It's there
It's
very much
pervasive.
so. Yes.
And later on, this kind of interest that I had shifted to justice in the intergroup context.
Right, right. Yeah. So you got the group processes and identity issues.
Yeah, identity issues and all. So it's kind of, this is where I am kind of located as a researcher. Justice, intergroup, the various group processes
Work,
uh,
right.
that fascinate me. Um, I am not just kind of exploring, what are the consequences of justice that I did initially. But today one is looking more, not at conflict, but at kind of creating those kind of spaces
Right.
where we could live peacefully.
Right. So coming up with very livable, viable solutions, so to speak.
Yeah, so one of the projects, not very recently, but completed, is called Shared Spaces.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we were looking at, despite injustices and everything around, despite all what we talk about, fractured social relationships, etc. How, and despite we having our individual identities that we have,
Right.
how we can still build those kinds of spaces for ourselves
Right.
where these are shared, we interact, and this probably we thought is one way forward. I'm not saying that's the ultimate,
Yeah.
but one way forward, creating those shared spaces and kind of having a dialogue,
Right.
kind
No, I
of
think that's
engaging with those processes. So that project that I did, which was a multi-centric big project, submitted, sponsored by Indian Council of Social Science Research, it was called the Shared Spaces, exploring the boundaries, barriers, and bridges in contemporary India. And yeah, so we went to several places in the country and tried to kind of look at what are the sharings that we have, what are those areas where we share, what are those interests that we share, and how these can be cultivated further.
I think that's an
Uh,
extremely relevant line of research. I think very, very pertinent, especially in terms of the applied aspects of it, I'm sure. So now, ma'am, coming over to your role as the regional representative of the IACCP in South Asia, uh, how do you think the association can bridge some of those gaps that you talked about early on, to say that we need to bring in better methodological training and say a publishing culture, for example? So, I mean, how do you look at your role as the regional representative?
um, I think we have a very important role, not just in kind of disseminating information about IACCP, but as I said, also capacity building. One of the things that can kind of help us, both in membership and also visibility of IACCP, could be one major conference here. Um, and the last one that we had was in 1981 at Utkal. I don't know about it because I was a student. So, but that's what I have heard from everyone, and I've read, the collection of papers
Yeah,
that
the
were published.
reports. Yes.
I, put my papers for the executive of IACCP. One of the plans that I had was to have a regional conference in India. And because I think IACCP did try sometimes to have something in Delhi sometime, some long years back.
Long years ago,
But
right,
that
right.
did not work out. But I did a very successful Asian Association of Social Psychology conference in 2009,
I see.
which had
Right.
about 657 participants.
Wow.
354 of them were from abroad. And that gave me the
Abroad.
confidence that, at least in Delhi, with the kind of infrastructure we have and the conference facilities
Infrastructure we have.
that we have, and also my institute, IIT Delhi
Right,
also has very fabulous conference facilities, and it's
right,
possible
right.
to do it. That will give maybe a small regional conference, maybe not of that level that we,
Yeah, it's a good starting
yeah,
point. Absolutely. It's a good start.
because see, a lot of us do cross-cultural psychology, and India itself is a hub to do cross-cultural psychology. Because Rachna will agree, from north to south and from east to west, there are so many cultures and
Yeah, a
subcultures.
lot of diversity. In
Lots of
fact, even
diversity.
indigenous psychology or intracultural differences, it would be so interesting to get a boost to study some of
Oh yes,
those.
and it's really, I mean, something that needs to be kind of with the vast kind of diversity. I
Diversity
think
that we
that's
have.
very, very important. And I sometimes feel you don't need to go out of the country to do a cross-cultural work.
Right.
No,
That's true. That's
within the
true.
country, you can very well do a very interesting cross-cultural work. And therefore, I think one thing that we could do, maybe not have, right now because there are lots of conferences lined up, maybe
Yes,
a
happening.
smaller. So one something that IACCP should encourage. Regional conferences are something that IACCP has been
Yes.
doing, but at the same time, doing some not that big specific regional conference,
Yeah.
but what I'm looking for a word for that, but in specific regions. So maybe a conference for East
Right.
Asia. Okay,
Hmm.
maybe a
Yeah. So very small, very focused
very focused.
regions.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Right.
for example, the global south.
Yeah.
Or for example, the South nations.
Right.
And especially those nations that are in need of
Yeah.
training and capacity building.
Absolutely. I think these are very important areas, training, capacity building, and that's how then the collaborations will kind of flourish, once we, because oftentimes I've realized that even within the region, even though we may be members of IACCP, we may not know that somebody else is also a member. And so those kinds of intra-regional collaborations can also then take place.
Oh,
So
certainly.
I think, yeah, yeah.
So that's something I would really, with Rachna, you and, there, and we will certainly have other people also. One
Yes, yes,
can do a
definitely.
small conference looking at some aspect of culture, maybe Indian culture. In fact,
Yes.
I was
That would be
teaching,
very interesting.
I do feel because today I was teaching in my class emotions and I was talking about lajja as a specific
Okay.
gendered
Emotions.
Indian emotion. So
Right.
I mean, that's just to give an example, but probably something of that kind, not having many participants, maybe 50, 60, with
Right.
some seed funding from
Yes.
IACCP. I think in India also you do get a lot of
Yes, we get a lot of
funding now.
funding.
That's not such an
Right.
issue. And that's something that we need to do. That will have, membership will increase.
Right. And a lot of value for a young scholar.
Value and visibility of the association.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, ma'am, my next question is more to do with what are some of the benefits and advantages? Say a young scholar or a doctoral student wants to become a member. So, what kind of benefits regionally as well as in the association should this person be looking forward to?
So there are things. First of all, you have the summer schools.
Yeah,
I think that's something that the young person should be looking at. And I know a lot of people who have been running those summer schools,
yeah,
very well trained. They're very organized summer schools, and I think that's a big, something that one would look at.
Yes, definitely.
Um, then, this association has won some of the top psychologists,
Very true.
and therefore, some kind of a mentorship
Yes.
program is something that the association can kind of start. And maybe some of us who are active there can provide, that mentorship to young scholars
Young
who
scholars.
are interested in doing cross-cultural work.
Right.
So that mentorship is something that probably is important, and they should look forward to it. Because if I see, even my career, if you see, had I not got the mentorship
Yes.
from Professor Janapande, Professor Durganand Sinha, as I said, John Bermans and all, and this, meeting with Puttinga, John Berry, etc., I think it would not have come to this place where I am today. So there has to be a mentorship program, very strong one. And I am one of the beneficiaries of the mentorship program, I can say, because I can vouch that my two teachers here, they had been mentoring me in various ways. And that probably led to my interest. And also, one gets committed to that, not that kind, to that kind of work, those ideas, and also people around.
Yes, very
So
true.
that's something people, young scholars should look at. And we should also be doing something for them. They will look at if we provide those opportunities.
Yes, 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 absolutely. I think it's a win-win situation both for the mentors as well as
Yeah.
the mentees to be able to, gain from some of these benefits of being part of this association. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time and your very encouraging remarks about the association, as well as for young scholars to become a part of this. In a way, I look at it also as a movement to bring together people in the global south and to be able to kind of claim our space and put forward uh, dimensions of psychology that perhaps have not been so quote unquote mainstream, and so I think this is a wonderful opportunity. And definitely, as members of the association, we would encourage more membership and would like more people to join, uh, only to add to its vibrancy and to kind of expand psychological knowledge globally.